Probably the first real saint in ISKCON, Srila Jayananda Prabhu, left this world. So there's not many of us around who knew Jayananda or met Jayananda, served with Jayananda, but I had that great fortune. So in the disappearance days of the great Vaishnavas, Srila Prabhupada always used to chant one beautiful song by Narottam Das Thakur. So if you have your device, which I hope first of all is on silent, you can look up Jaya Nilo Premanana. Or maybe they'll get it on, oh, there's a screen here today. Jaya Nilo Premadana Karuna Praju Jaya Nilo Premadana Karuna Praju Eno Prabhu Kota Gela Acharya Thakur Kahamora Swarup Rupa Kaha Sanata Kahadasa Rago Nata Patita Pava Nata Patita Pava Kahamura Bhata Juga Kaha Kavira Ekakale Kota Gela Gora Natara Pasani Kutivo Mata Anale Pashivo Koranga Gunera Nini Kota Gila Pavo Saba Sangira Sange Jai Kaila Bila Jai Kaila Bila Se sangana paya khande narotamada. Se sangana paya khande narotamada. Jayani prema dana karuna praju. Karuna Prabhu Ena Prabhu Kota Gela Acharya Thakur Eno Prabhu Kota Gela Jayananda Thakur Jaya Vaishnava 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 Thakur Jai Jai Prabhupada 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 Srila Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Srila Prabhupada Vaishnav Thakur ki Jai Nityalila Vishnu Vishnupada Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki ISKCON Samstapakacharya Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada ki Ananta Guri Vaishnavinda ki Sadgoswami Prabhu ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Prem se kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopi Go Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan ki Brajabhumi Vrindavan Dham ki Sri Navadvip Mayapur Dham ki Sri Jagannath Puri Dham ki Gangamai Jamunamai ki Srimati Vrindadevi Tulsi Maharani ki Disappearance Day of Srila Jayananda Thakur ki Srila Jayananda Thakur ki Dai Gaur Premanand. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to you, Srila Prabhupada. So Jayananda Prabhu, he was a very, very special devotee. That Srila Prabhupada loved him so much. Whatever temple Prabhupada would come to, if Jayananda was there, he'd always ask for him. Because Jayananda would never come. He was always busy doing service. So he would never come, but Prabhupada would have to call for him. In fact, Prabhupada wrote a beautiful letter to Jayananda. It's interesting, he wrote it in as if Jayananda was still around. My dear Jayananda, please accept my blessings. I am feeling very intensely your separation. In 1967, you joined me in San Francisco. You were driving my car and chanting Hare Krishna. You were the first man to give me some contribution, $5,000, for printing my Bhagavad Gita. After that, you have rendered very favorable service to Krishna in different ways. I so hope at the time of your death, you were remembering Krishna. And as a result, you have been promoted to the eternal association of Krishna. As you were hearing Krishna Kirtan, I'm sure that you were directly promoted to Krishna Loka. Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo viti tattvata jaktva deham punarjanma mameti sorjuna. Krishna has done a great favor to you, not to continue your diseased body. And this has given you a very suitable place for your service. Thank you very much. Your ever well-wisher A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksurun Militam Dena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Jena Bhutale Sayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatrubhyascha kripasindu vevacha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Jayananda Thakur ki. I think Jayananda only one time came to India. He didn't like it here. He didn't have any service. He was always engaged in service. So although actually visiting holy places and sitting here in the 24-hour kirtan, that is also service. But he liked to do some physical work. You can see he was very big. So not many devotees from India know him because he only came here one time and then he went right back to his service. But living here in Vrindavan, we're very, very fortunate. We get to take darshan of Jayananda almost every day. Do you know where we get darshan of Jayananda? In Prabhupada's Samadhi, on this side, there's New York Rathayatra. This was an amazing event in Srila Prabhupada's life. Because he started out life doing a little toy Rathayatra on Mahatma Gandhi Road with just a few children and some parents. Now here he was going down Fifth Avenue, probably the most important street in the whole world. Of course, as far as we're concerned, Kunj Gali is the most important street in the whole world. But anyway, by material estimation, Fifth Avenue is the place. And there was Prabhupada going down Fifth Avenue with 3 huge chariots. Nowadays, it's impossible to get permission. If you've already been doing it like we've been doing for so many years, you can do it, you can still do it, but no new parades are allowed down. It's such an important street and they can't afford to block it off. So somehow we are very fortunate. So anyway, that was we can't imagine the joy in Prabhupada's heart going down Fifth Avenue in New York City with Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra. So on the Balaram side of Rath, you see a big, tall fellow. Jayananda was a very big person. He was over 6 feet tall. He was a very big person. You see a big person there with his hand raised in the air. That's Jayananda. So every day you can come in Prabhupada's Samadhi and get darshan of Jayananda. So Jayananda, he came from a very simple beginning. He was from Ohio, which is an area that's considered very, very conservative in America. And he went, it was a middle-class family. They weren't particularly wealthy, but they weren't very poor either. They were very nicely situated. And he went to the University of Ohio, but something was missing in his life. He didn't feel happy. Even managed to get a degree in mechanical engineering. Now, those days, there was no internet, there was no cell phones, there was nothing. So mechanical engineering, nowadays you want a degree in IT of some sort. But mechanical engineering was the degree to have. He could have gotten a very nice job. But eventually he came to San Francisco and became a taxi cab driver. And devotees asked Jayananda, why you didn't get a job? You could have got a nice job. He said, I didn't fit in with those people. Their only goal in life was get a nice house, get a nice car, get this, get a nice bank balance. I just wasn't into it. I didn't fit in with those people. So driving a taxi, he didn't have to just pick up people and find out where they're going and take them to their place. And he didn't have to deal with anyone, really. So he was a taxi cab driver. But he was feeling very, very empty in his life. Something was missing. Even he described that he was feeling suicidal. He was so depressed. It's very amazing. Bhakti Siddhanta Prabhu, our godbrother, one time he was in Delhi for some project of some sort. I can't remember exactly. And somehow he met some Sikh fellow. But somehow the subject of Jayananda came up. And that Sikh fellow mentioned, when he heard that Jayananda was from Ohio and he went to Ohio State University, he said, I also went to Ohio State University. He was an exchange student. Those days they called it exchange student. One student from here would go to America, and from America one student would come here. So he went there to University of Ohio and he started saying, yeah, the guy you're talking about sounds very much like my friend. I had one friend, he was, I was a classmate, not a classmate, he was a roommate. He was assigned in the university, they had their room together. Now, how is it possible that all the hundreds and thousands of people who went to America as an exchange student, the Bhakti Siddhanta ran into this fellow? And he said, he was always talking about God, he was always talking about purpose of life. He never, I would never see him drinking. He was never chasing after girls. He was a very interesting fellow, And, what was your friend's name? And he said, well, his Karmi name was Jim Kaur. He said, that was my roommate. Out of all the hundreds and thousands of people who went to America to exchange students, this fellow happened to be Jayananda's roommate. And he ran into Bhakti Siddhanta Prabhu. And he said, he was always talking about God. He was always talking about purpose of life. He wasn't drinking. He didn't do anything, wasn't chasing after girls. He was a very interesting fellow. So when he left all that life and he was living in San Francisco, which was, that was in the 67, means that was around the hippie days. So, and that was the center, was San Francisco. If you come to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. That was those days. So he read in the paper that some Indian man, some Indian Swami was coming to San Francisco. And he thought maybe Indian Swami, because people used to look to India for spiritual inspiration. So he was thinking, maybe I'll find something there. So he went to the airport, and he was probably the only, we called them straight, because all the hippies, they were, wild people, We wore funny clothes and had long hair and wearing bells and so many things, So people were there with funny robes and bells and all kinds of funny instruments to greet Prabhupada when he came. Allen Ginsberg was leading because he was head of the counterculture. So, so Jayananda just took one look at Prabhupada's lovely face, and he just fell in love with him. So he decided to start coming to the classes. They had a little storefront, because that's how we started in New York, in a storefront. So everywhere we went, it wasn't that we had big, beautiful temples like this. We used to just rent a house in the low rent district where nobody used to go. But we could get cheap houses there for cheap rent, and we painted funny colors and put a sign, Radhakrishna Temple, and that was a temple. So they started in a storefront in New York. So they thought that was the system, so they got another storefront in Haight-Ashbury, which was the middle of all the hippies. So he started coming to the classes and listening to Prabhupada. He found, this is the philosophy that I was looking for. And Prabhupada noticed this because he stuck out from everybody else. Everybody else had wild hair everywhere and wild clothes. And even Prabhupada one time in Leelamrita says under his breath, he said, "It's the darkest of the dark." These people. This is the amazing thing that Prabhupada did, was he took people who were lowest class of people, crazy people who we made Yamaraj's hard drive crash keeping track of what we were doing. But Prabhupada took them and he spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. This is the miracle. People wanted to see miracles. This is the miracle that Prabhupada took these people. And he saw that despite all of our ignorance and tamagun, there was a little tiny spark. We were wondering, we were trying all these things because we were looking, what is the purpose of life? What is the goal of life? We had this. So Prabhupada saw that tiny little spark and he fanned it and he made it into a fire. And he spread that fire all over the world. And now we have beautiful temples. We just celebrated 50 years of this Krishna Balaram Mandir. Beautiful temple coming up in Mayapur. Beautiful. All over Delhi, there's so many jewel-like temples. It's just amazing what Prabhupada has done. So anyway, Jayananda stuck out, so Prabhupada used to pay special attention to him. So finally, Jayananda, he would do his taxi work, but he would take some back to Godheads with him, and he would tell people about chanting Hare Krishna, and he would give them back to Godheads. And, the money he would donate to the temple. He was practically the only one who was giving any donation. Everybody else was just, they were hippies. We didn't have any money. We didn't have anything. So Prabhupada was very pleased with Jayananda. And finally, he needed to print his Bhagavad Gita as it is. So Jayananda, he had in his savings account, I guess, $5,000. Now, $5,000 nowadays isn't much, but I looked it up on the internet. $1967 in 2025 is about more than $40,000. $5,000 is a lot of money. That was because Prabhupada was getting, people were putting coins and quarters and dimes and nickels in the donation basket, and maybe somebody would give $1, but $5,000, that was amazing. So Prabhupada mentions it here in his letter. And Jayananda, he just He just loved to serve. And it didn't matter what service it was. Sometimes he was even in charge of taking out the garbage. And in the old temple on Valencia Street in San Francisco. And one new person came to the temple, so somebody sent him, you go see Jayananda. So he went to Jayananda, and Jayananda was taking out the garbage, and he was preaching to this boy, and this boy was singing, this is a trash man of the temple, and he's so blissful. The other devotees, it must be really amazing. So he became a devotee. I can't remember who he was, but anyway, he became a devotee. And Jayananda, since he drove a taxi, he was a mechanic. He used to do his own mechanic work. So he was always working on cars. And I remember there was one devotee named Jai Rishi. We don't see him, he used to come every Kartik from LA. And he told how in Los Angeles they used to hear about this devotee named Jayananda, who was a pure devotee, and he had this idea, Jayananda, he must have completely pressed kurta and pressed dhoti and, his beautiful bead bag and his head in the air and chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare. So he came to San Francisco because they were doing Rathayatra. One day he saw somebody was underneath the car. They have this little thing on roller skates that you can lie on. There's a big piece of plywood, and you lie on your back and you slide under the car. So he was under the car and his legs were sticking out, and he asked him, "Can you give me that screwdriver?" And so he picked up the screwdriver, handed it under the car, and then Jayananda rolled out, completely covered with black grease, face with black grease, clothes with black grease, torn clothes. He says, "Haribol, Prabhu, where are you from?" He said, "I'm from LA." He said, "And you?" He said, "I'm Jayananda." He was shocked. He had this idea of a pure devotee, but Jayananda just, whatever service was there, taking out the garbage, doing anything. He was a mechanic, so gradually they started this Rathayatra festival, but they were just doing, they just put you can see those old pictures, they just put the deity on a truck, on a flatbed truck, and so he decided, Prabhupada had shown pictures of Rathayatra in Puri, so he decided to make the first Rathayatra cart. Because he was a mechanic, he was a carpenter, he was everything. That's why he became known as Mr. Rathayatra. And in fact, Prabhupada has ordered that Jayananda's picture be, anytime there's Rathayatra, Jayananda's picture must be there. Because he started this Rathayatra festival. And Jayananda, his quality was, he was always encouraging people. And you couldn't criticize anybody in front of Jayananda. If you started criticizing, Jayananda just walked away. He couldn't hear Vaishnav Ninda. He couldn't tolerate. But he himself was always encouraging. In fact, one time he was building that Rathayatra cart, and some young hippie came up, big tall hippie came up, and said, "Hey, you want to help?" He said, "All right." He said, "Here, I want you to hold this nail." So he beat that nail. He just took one hit, bang. "Hey, you're really expert. Are you a carpenter?" So, "No, I've never done this before." No, you're really great. You're really great. "Now here, I'll hold the nail, you hit it." So he held the nail and that boy hit it, bang. He said, "Wow, you're really expert. You sure you're not a carpenter?" "No, I've never done this before." "Here, now you try. You hold the nail and you hit it, And so then he hit it. He said, "Wow, you're really expert. Now you just do this whole line, put these nails," they needed little nails to hang the flower garlands. And that person, who he became? Jayapataka Maharaj. This is Jayananda. He was always encouraging. He was never discouraging. And as the Rathayatra time came and it had to get the carts, Murphy has a law that 10% of the work 10% of the work is done in 90% of the time, and 10% of the work is done in and 90% of the work is done in 10% of the time. So somehow the last few days, nobody even saw Jayananda sleep. He was just working day and night. No one ever even found him asleep, He was just always working day and night to get the Rathayatra ready for Rathayatra day. And there's so many wonderful, and he always kept a big, Jayananda loved prasad, especially halava. So whoever was working on the Rathayatra cart, he always made sure there was a big bucket of halava around. And he always gave lots of halava to everyone. So then Jayananda revolutionized Rathayatra. That's why Prabhupada has this picture on the cart in order that we put it on the cart. Because he made these beautiful carts for the first time. And Jayananda was an interesting character. Because those days we didn't have money. It wasn't, now we have cashews and kishmish and everything. But those days we just used to go to the supermarket and go around back where they threw out, because the bananas got black spots on them. That means they're ripe, they're ready to eat, but they can't sell them, so they throw them in the back, and used to collect those. And used to go to the wholesale market. And, this is run by the Italian mafia, so all the Italian mafiosos, he told them his name was Jayananda. They couldn't deal with Jayananda, so he was Jayananda. And used to get so many things. They loved him so much. He would bring them prasadam. He'd always give them halava. He always had prasad. He'd bring them prasadam. They all loved him, Jayananda. One day when Rathayatra was coming, he got 4 truckloads of bananas donated from the king of all the Italian mafiosos who ran. I can't remember what the name of his company was. There's a big company there in the wholesale market. But they all loved Jayananda. Jayananda was like that, you just loved him from the first. I can remember one time, I was president of Portland in the northwest corner of America, and we used to drive down to Rathayatra. So one of those early years of Rathayatra, we drove down with a temple van with all the devotees. And those days, I was famous as a cook. I don't do much cooking, but those days in fact, Narottam, he was famous on the East Coast, and on the West Coast, I was famous. In fact, I remember Vishnu Jan Maharaj came to our temple one time with his bus, and after taking prasad, he said, "This is the first temple, and I've been to 22 so far, that has nice prasadam." So Jayananda came up and he put his arm around me and he says, "We got 1 ton of potatoes and we got 1 ton of cauliflower." And they had this type of thing is called a steamer. It's got, steel jacket, and then they run the steam around the steel jacket, and whatever's inside the compartments gets steamed and cooked. And then there was a big, huge monster thing like this, also with steam jacket, and you take out whatever came from those compartments, you put it in there, and then you can mix it. So he said, we need you to cook. And nobody could refuse Jayananda. So all night long I was cooking. I would put, 50 kilos in one compartment, and 50 kilos of potatoes in one, 50 kilos of cauliflower in another, and steam them, pull them out, stir them around, throw in all the spices, throw in all the tomatoes and whatever else we put, bell peppers. Whole night I was cooking. By the end of the night, I was cooked. But Jayananda he was like that. He could get you to do things that you couldn't possibly do. I couldn't possibly have done that. I don't know how I did it. It was just only mercy of Jayananda. And Jayananda, he loved prasadam. I can remember devotees told me how sometimes at Sunday feast, he would go into the kitchen and he'd get the mahaplate. And then he'd come out, because, he was Jayananda, nobody would stop him for where he was going. And he would just walk out and then slip out the back door, and he'd take the whole Mahaplate and maybe grab a couple of other devotees, and they'd eat the whole Mahaplate from the Sunday feast. One time, it was nice devotee, he's no longer in this world, my godbrother Keshava. He was president of San Francisco Temple. So, on the other side of the bay, San Francisco on one side, then there's a bay, and on the other side there's Berkeley and Oakland and all these places. So in Oakland there's a penitentiary there, a jail. So they had a program in the jail. So Jayananda and Keshava, they called up Danivir. He was president of Berkeley. He said, we got a prison preaching program on your side of the bay, so we want you to make lots and lots of halava with lots and lots of butter. Because in the old days, we never made halava with ghee. We made it with butter. And I tell you, butter halava's got a different taste than ghee halava. Very special. Made me a devotee. So, and then you make strawberries. You make Simply Wonderfuls, but make them with strawberries. Strawberry Simply Wonderfuls, with lots of butter and lots of strawberries. And we'll come pick you up, and we'll go to this program in the Oakland Penitentiary. So they had this old truck. It didn't even have a gas pedal. Just Jayananda would tie a string around his big toe and tie it to the rod was there where the pedal went. He would tie it to that. And somehow or other, like that, he was driving and working the clutch and the brake and everything. And there wasn't any window between the cab and the back part of the truck. So they drove over to Berkeley, and then they loaded up all the prasadam, they loaded up all the Berkeley devotees, and then they're driving down the road, and Jayananda's there with this string around his toe tied to the little rod of the gas pedal, driving like this. And he looks at Keshava, he says, Keshava, I bet the devotees would be really enthusiastic to distribute prasadam if they had a taste of it. Hey, Jayananda, that's a great idea. Hey, back there, pass out some halava and simplies to all the devotees and send 2 plates up front, So they sent 2 plates up front, and Jayananda with a string on his toe, and he's going down the road somehow driving and eating halava and Simply Wonderfuls. Hey, Keshava, that was really delicious. Maybe we should try some more, huh? What do you think? Jayananda, that's a great idea. Hey, back there, give some more to everyone and send a couple of plates up front. Huh? And this way, finally, Danivir looked, and there was just a few little crumbs sticking to the pot, the halava pot. And the Simply Wonderfuls, if you know them, you used to roll them in the milk powder. So there was just a tray with milk powder. That was it. There was nothing left. And Danivir was thinking, oh my God, what have we done? That prasadam that was meant for the fallen conditioned souls, we ate it all. We're so fallen. And then by that point, they drove up to the gate of the prison, and the guard came out, and he put his head inside the window. He said, you don't have any food in here, it's illegal to bring any food inside the prison. Oh, no, sir, we don't have any food in this van. They knew all along this was just Jayananda's trick. That's how Jayananda loved prasadam. Like I said, Jayananda, he was always covered with grease, and because he was always fixing the cars, and his clothes, it wasn't really clothes, it was holes sewed together with some threads. And he was embarrassing for the devotees to see Jayananda. So somehow or other, but Jayananda, he was just only interested in serving Krishna and giving everything to Krishna. And serving Prabhupada and giving everything to Prabhupada. He didn't want anything for himself. He said, no, Jayananda, you got to buy some clothes, it's embarrassing, So somehow they convinced him. There's a place called the Salvation Army. People give their old clothes to them, and fix the holes and sew them up, and then they sell them, and then they do their charitable work. They sell them and do their charitable work. So you can get a set of pants in those days for a quarter. That's, 1/4 of $1, 25 cents. A shirt for a dime or something like that. So they gave some money to Jayananda and sent him to the Salvation Army. But still he was thinking, all this money is Krishna's money. How can I spend it on myself? So he went in the dressing room and he put on the cloth, and then he put his old cloth on top of it. Of course, it was all filled with holes. It was easy to see what he was up to. And he tried to walk out of the store, without paying. So immediately the guard, his cloth had completely holes. They could see the cloth, the Salvation Army cloth underneath, So they got him, they called the police, they arrested him. Then he went to court, and then the judge said, well, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty? He said, well, I have to plead guilty, but I want to say something. Can I? So the judge said, all right. You see, I'm in an organization, we're just serving God. And everything we have is meant for God's service. And I was thinking, how can I spend this money? This is God's money. How can I spend it on myself? I just couldn't do it, Your Honor. I didn't really want to steal, but just everything I do is for God, and I couldn't spend this money on myself, And Jayananda was crying, the judge was crying. He says, all right, case dismissed. And the policeman who came to testify said, all right, I'll pay for it. That was Jayananda. He had this effect on people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's so many stories of Jayananda. Mm-hmm. Then he decided that he wanted to have Rathayatra in New York, because New York is the city of the world. We have to have Rathayatra on Fifth Avenue. Somehow or other, Tosa and Krishna, who was just here a couple of months ago, he managed to get the permission and everything. And in this cart. And somebody would go with Jayananda, and all day long they would drive around the city, and he would see some lumber somewhere, he would note it down, and he'd see some, he saw these big, they have these, they have cables, they have them on these big rounds, I don't know what to call it, but they wrap the cable around it like this. So they would make great wheels for the Rathayatra, because they have two ends like this. They wrapped all the cable in between the two ends. And he would note it down. He went around, but he didn't get anything. And the devotee was wondering, this is strange. Then, late at night, Jayananda woke up the devotee. He said, come on, we have to go to get some things for the Rathayatra. This time? Yeah, this time. And Jayananda would go to the railway yard where all this lumber was there, and we called it Midnight Auto Supply. He would just take all the lumber, put it in the truck. Where he saw the big spools for the cables, he would put them in the truck. This way they would go around and get things by Midnight Auto Supply. Or we call it 5-finger discount. So that was Jayananda, always trying to save Krishna's money. And it was this time, somehow or other, Jayananda, he started to get some disease. We didn't hardly let anybody know. But he was getting the beginnings of leukemia, which is a disease of the blood. But he was working so hard. Finally, the few days before Rathayatra, nobody saw Jayananda sleep. He was just working so hard. And one night he came back to the temple late at night, and he was walking down the hall, and Keshav Maharaj from Bhaktivedanta Ashram, he saw Jayananda walking. he was doubled over like this. He was walking down the hallway. And he just happened to come out of his room. I guess he was going to the bathroom. Some saw Jayananda like that, doubled over in pain. And he said, Jayananda, what's the matter? Jayananda stood up. He said, oh, nothing. He says, no, I know what I saw. Right? You tell me what's the matter. Huh? So then he took off his shirt. He had all these strange sores all over his chest. He rolled up his sleeves, of his pant leg. He showed them all these sores. He said, what is it? I don't know. He says, you have to go to a doctor. He said, not till after Rathayatra. Huh? I promise I'll go to the doctor, but you don't tell anybody about this. And I'll promise that I'll go to the doctor as soon as Rathayatra is over. So he never said a word to anybody. And that was an amazing thing. The place, it's very interesting, the place that they got to build the cart, because they were looking for a big empty place. New York City, there's hardly any empty place, but in the railway yard, there was an empty plot. So they went to the railway people, and they said, no, we just sold that. You have to talk to the owner. Who's he? He said, Donald Trump. Of course, he never met Donald Trump, but there's a whole, people make so many stories, but Tosan Krishna was involved in the whole thing. He said, no, they just went to the office, and they thought it was a charming idea that the Hare Krishnas build their Rathayatra cart on their property, so they let him. So they let us build it. So they were building the cart. It was night before Rathayatra, and Jayananda, he invented this because there's always these wires. Now, of course, they've made everything underground, but always wires, and the carts would get stuck, and you had to get them past. They poke up the wires and do things. But Jayananda was a mechanic. He was a mechanical engineer. So he made the up and down going domes to the carts. So in Balaram's cart, they were testing it out, and they cranked it up, and they got it up. This is the night before Rathayatra. They're checking out whether it's going to work or not. And they cranked it up, and suddenly a huge wind came blowing down between all the buildings. And it caught that cloth and just pulled the whole dome over, bent all the iron, crumpled the structure, everything came crashing down. It's the night before Rathayatra. Somehow or other, they managed to, they told Jayananda, we're going to do it. Because Jayananda could inspire people like that. So somehow or other, they managed to get that. At 6 o'clock in the morning, they had finished rebuilding the cart, and it was ready to go drag it down to Central Park is where they started. They would go Central Park to Washington Square Park. So the thing was ready. And you can see those pictures, Jayananda, without sleep, suffering from leukemia. He's dancing in front of the Rathayatra cart. And as soon as the Rathayatra cart hit Washington Square Park, big park is there, and they were serving up prasadam and having kirtan on the stage and different programs. And nobody could find Jayananda. Finally, one devotee looked up inside the cart, and Jayananda was so tired, he knew nobody would ever find him. He climbed up inside the dome of the cart, and on the cross beams, he lay down and went to sleep. He just lay down and went to sleep inside the cart. So the next day, Maharaj, because he was a brahmachari then, he came to him. He said, now I kept my end of the bargain. I didn't tell anybody about this problem. Now you go to the doctor. It's all right. So they went to the doctor's office. And they ran some tests. And they told him, you got leukemia. There's no cure. You're probably going to die. And like that. So Jayananda told Keshav that you go, Keshav Bharati, that's I was trying to remember, Keshav Bharati. He said, you go and make some burfi. Make a whole tray of burfi and bring it here to the hospital. So they made this whole tray of burfi, and they brought it, and Jayananda cut little diamond shapes out of it. And he was on the drip, they have your little thing sticking in your vein, and they had this little thing that holds the bottle upside down. And Jayananda said, come. Because Keshavari thought, well, Jayananda wants this prasadam for himself or something. He just heard he's got a disease and he's going to die. So he's ordering a whole bunch of prasadam. And Jayananda said, come on, let's go. And he grabbed the little thing with the bottle hanging under it, because it's got wheels on it. And they go down the corridor of the hospital to the recreation room where everybody's watching TV. And Jayananda comes in, and he turns off the TV, and he says, now we're going to have kirtan. And he explained how to chant, and he told Keshav Bharati, please lead the kirtan. So they led a kirtan. He gave a speech. Here's the guy, he just found out he's going to die. He's got leukemia. And the only thing he thinks is how to save the fallen souls. So they had kirtan, and they distributed he had to cut up all the burfi into little diamonds, so they shipped it out, gave it out to all the people in the hospital. That was Jayananda. Finally, then Jayananda got the idea. Well, he went to Mexico, because in Mexico they did some treatments that were alternate treatments that were illegal in America, so he went to Mexico. I can't remember who the devotee was, but somebody rode with him in the bus. And they were coming back from Mexico. And they're going along, and all of a sudden Jayananda, he had this big bag. He opened the bag, and there was a big container. And he opened the container, and there was halava. And he and his devotee sat in his bus on the way to LA from Mexico, eating halava the whole way. So they got to LA, and Jayananda decided that they have to have Rathayatra in Los Angeles too. Now LA Rathayatra is one of the biggest in the world outside of India. So, and Jayananda was very, very sick. But he had a room across the street from the temple, and he was calling all his old friends and getting donations. Anyway, anyhow, he was getting donations, he's getting people to come and help. And one of those people was Ratnabhushan, who now has taken over the title of Mr. Rathayatra in LA. He always arranges the cart and everything. So, anyway, he was determined that they're going to have Rathayatra in LA. San Francisco was upset about this because they thought they were the only Rathayatra. But anyway, he was determined that they're going to have it. And he was actually getting donations. It was actually going to happen. And they knew Jayananda, he never liked to get any type of glorification. But his birthday was coming. And they knew he would never come if they told him that they had planned a birthday party. So they came to Jayananda and they tricked him. They said, Jayananda, there's a problem on the cart and only you can solve it. We can't figure it out. It's going to take your mind, your brain power to fix it. So they put Jayananda into a wheelchair and they wheeled him over to the parking lot next door to the LA temple where they still keep the carts. The whole LA community was there. And they had a cake in the form of a Rathayatra cart. And Jayananda saw that they had tricked him. And he didn't have any strength, but somehow he pushed himself up in that wheelchair. And he began to preach about Rathayatra, the importance of Rathayatra, and getting people to see Lord Jagannath and hear the chanting and take prasadam. He was just preaching very strongly. And they'd even called his parents. His parents were behind it with tears pouring down their cheeks because he had no strength left, but somehow he just stood up and he preached about Rathayatra. And then he just collapsed into the wheelchair and told him, bring me a knife. And he cut up the cake and he distributed cake to all the devotees. This was Jayananda. So finally he was getting weaker and weaker. He could hardly move. And this day Nrsimha Chaturdasi was coming soon. Somehow the day before Rathayatra, they had a tape recorder, or one of those mini tape recorders, if you remember those things. Now you know how old I am. Probably some of you don't even know what a tape recorder is, but anyway. They had, Prabhupada tapes playing in his ear all the time. Somehow early in the morning, before Mangalarti, one brahmachari, nobody had told him to do it, but he just got the idea. He went and he got Lord Jagannath's prasad garland from the day before, and he brought it over to Jayananda. And Jayananda was lying in the bed listening to Prabhupada. And he brought Lord Jagannath's prasad garland in. He put it around Jayananda. The conch shell for Mangalarti began to blow. And Jayananda opened his mouth and said, Hare Krishna. And Jayananda left this world. So auspicious. Nobody told him to bring Jagannath's garland. Somehow he just decided, let me bring this garland at that time. And while Mangalarti was starting, Jayananda left this world. And even after Jayananda's legacy still continued, even afterwards, one time, they were doing Rathayatra in San Francisco. And for all these types of things, if you're in the public park, you have to get permission. So, one devotee who took over the Rathayatra service, getting the permission, he went to get the permission. And he went to all the people. The last person he had to go to the mayor. And at that time, this is in, sometime after 1977, the mayor of San Francisco was a woman. And this was just in the very beginning of feminism. So to become the mayor, you had to be a very tough person. It wasn't an ordinary thing. You had to be a very, very heavy personality to become, it was a different type of world in those days. So here's she's the mayor of this big city, San Francisco. She's made it to the top, even being a woman. And she asked the boy, well, where's Jayananda? Because Jayananda was the one who because she used to be in the department that where they'd send him to the mayor, that department, she used to work in that department. So she was the one who would always, give the okay for the mayor to sign. So she knew Jayananda. She said, where's Jayananda? He said, well, last year he passed away. Now here's a woman who's made it to the top in those days in a man's world. Very heavy personality. In front of a complete stranger, she broke down just into tears. This was Jayananda. This is how he affected people. Even one time, way down in the Durban. Those who know Hindi, Dur means far. So there's one forest, it's called the Durban. So far away it's in South Africa. And they have Rathayatra also there. And one gentleman was visiting from America, and he happened to see the Rathayatra cart. Then he was watching the Rathayatra cart, and he saw the picture of his old friend was on the Rathayatra cart. This picture, he recognized him. And he started asking the people, the devotees. And they said, yeah, this is Jayananda. They said, no, he's from my hometown. And then they treated him very nicely. He wrote a letter to all his friends that if you ever see the Hare Krishnas, you just tell him that you know Jim Kaur. His name was Jim Kaur. You tell him you know Jim Kaur, and they'll treat you so nicely. They all treated me very nicely. You can't imagine. He's become very famous. Our old neighbor has become famous all over the world. Even in South Africa, I saw his picture on the big chariot that the Hare Krishnas pulled. So this was Jayananda. So I don't know if is anybody here who had any association with Jayananda? I guess not. Anybody have any questions? We'll put our voice to rest here. Time is up. There's so many wonderful stories we could tell about Jayananda, but those are some of the most... Yeah, no, Prabhupada told us that he said the two things. He said to keep the picture on the cart and to observe a day of remembrance of Jayananda. And as I said, we're very fortunate here. Every day we can get darshan of Jayananda just in the back of the samadhi in that diorama of the Rathayatra in New York. Jayananda's right in front of Baladev's cart with his hand, big tall fellow with his hand in the air. Every day I go and take darshan of Jayananda. Because he was such an inspiration in all our lives. And Prabhupada loved him dearly. So if there's no questions, then we can all fall down at the very soft and wonderful lotus feet of that great personality who created wonderful devotees like Jayananda, who started this Rathayatra festival. Srila Prabhupada ki, Jayananda Thakur ki, Gaur Premanande, Hare Krishna.